Resident Evil. Escape Raccoon City. Septic Blood. By Saren Ong. Duke Mason's life smelled like rot long before the city did. The smell came in layers. The upper layer was septic waste, baking in autumn heat, rising from cracked tanks and clogged leach fields beneath the yards of Raccoon City's suburban sprawl. The lower layer was old beer and cigarette smoke soaked into drywall from a house where shouting never really stopped. And beneath that, deeper, older, was the metallic scent of rage that had never fully left his bloodstream. He was 27 years old and ankle-deep in someone else's shit. The homeowner stood on the lawn above him, complaining about pricing, while Duke worked in the shallow pit beside a lifted concrete lid. "You plumbers think you're doctors," the man grumbled. $600 to unclog a line." Duke tightened his wrench without looking up. He'd once been accepted to Cornell University. Engineering. Full ride. He still had the acceptance letter in a shoebox under his bed. He had also once beaten a police sergeant within inches of death with his bare hands. Life pivoted hard on that second fact. The sergeant survived. Duke went to prison. Cornell rescinded its offer before his sentencing date. 2 years inside a state facility had changed his posture, but not his direction. He came out broader in the shoulders, quieter in speech, and permanently marked. Now he replaced septic tanks while the man he'd nearly killed still wore a badge at the Raccoon Police Department. The irony was almost funny. Almost. He finished the job, washed his hands with water from a plastic jug, and climbed into his white work van. The dashboard clock read 4:17 p.m. The radio crackled with routine afternoon news. Minor disturbances reported near the downtown district. Duke turned it off. Raccoon always had disturbances. When he pulled into his apartment complex lot, the air felt heavier than usual. Humid, pressurized, the kind of atmosphere that hinted at a storm that hadn't yet broken. Inside his apartment, the red light on his answering machine blinked. He pressed play. Static hissed. "Duke, it's Charlie." Duke paused. Charlie Barnes, one of the only people who had visited him in prison. "I'm in town for a few days. Aunt Marie passed. Service tomorrow at 11. If you can make it..." Leaping Frog after. Duke stood still. Charlie didn't live here anymore. He had left Raccoon City years ago, moved to Arizona after the Army, Flagstaff, a cabin in the woods, teaching survival courses to tourists who wanted to pretend they were wild. Charlie had gotten out. Duke had not. The funeral Raccoon City Memorial Cemetery sat on a gentle hill overlooking the industrial district. The smokestacks in the distance gave the skyline a gray haze, even on clear days. The funeral was small. Closed casket, a handful of relatives. Charlie stood at the front with hands folded, posture rigid but not fragile. Duke stayed near the back. When the priest finished and people began to disperse, Duke approached. Charlie looked thinner than he remembered. Hard lines under his eyes. "You good?" Duke asked. Charlie gave a small shrug. "As good as I get." They didn't hug. They didn't need to. "How's Arizona?" Duke asked. "Quiet," Charlie replied. Duke nodded. They walked to their cars. "Leaping Frog?" Charlie asked. "Yeah." They drove separately. Leaping Frog Bar. The Leaping Frog hadn't changed since high school. Sticky floors, dim lights, factory workers and off-duty cops crowded around battered pool tables. A jukebox hummed something country and sad. Duke and Charlie took a booth in the back corner. They ordered beers, talked about nothing. The kind of nothing that only works when you already know the worst parts of each other. Eventually, Duke asked, "You ever miss it?" Charlie glanced around the bar. "Miss what?" "Being from here." Charlie thought about that. "No." Duke smirked faintly. "Must be nice." Charlie studied him. "You can leave." Duke let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, sure." Charlie didn't argue. He knew about Duke's mother, about the cop stepfather, about the arrest, about the chain that kept Duke tied to this city long after his sentence ended. Responsibility could be worse than prison. They left close to midnight. Charlie walked to his car beneath a flickering parking lot light. "Drive safe," Duke called. Charlie nodded once and got behind the wheel. Duke climbed into his own truck and drove home. He didn't know that within the hour Charlie would collide with something that shouldn't have been standing upright. He didn't know the infection had already spread through half the city. He didn't know this was the last night Raccoon City would pretend to be normal. Morning, the pounding on Duke's apartment door was violent enough to rattle the frame. He rolled off the couch and grabbed the nearest heavy object, a pipe wrench, before opening it. Brad Vickers stood there, sweating, breathing hard, eyes wide. Brad flew helicopters for stars. He had a reputation for nerves. Duke had seen him panic before. Never like this. "They released it," Brad said. "Released what?" "Umbrella. The virus. It's not contained." Duke stared at him. Brad shoved a Beretta into his hands along with 2 loaded magazines. "I'm serious. I saw things. You need to leave." Sirens wailed outside. Gunfire cracked somewhere close. Brad turned and ran down the hallway without another word. Duke looked at the pistol in his hands, then at the open doorway. He didn't think. He moved. His mother's house traffic was already collapsing. 2 cars blocked an intersection. Doors open, no drivers in sight. A man staggered into the street, clutching his arm while another chased him. Then the chaser lunged and bit into the man's neck. Duke pressed harder on the gas. When he pulled into his mother's driveway, the front door stood open. He heard her scream before he crossed the threshold. The kitchen was chaos. Blood on the tile, broken chair, his stepfather on top of her, biting her throat. The infected police sergeant lifted his head slowly, eyes cloudy, mouth red. The man who had ruled Duke's childhood with fists and authority now looked like an animal. Duke raised the Beretta. 2 shots. The sound inside the house was deafening. The infected cop's skull snapped backward. He collapsed beside her. Duke dropped to his knees. His mother's breathing was shallow. Her hand found his sleeve. "Run," she whispered. He wanted to stay, wanted to drag her outside. Wanted to burn the house down. Instead, he obeyed the only command she ever gave him without hesitation. He ran. The city was already burning in pockets. Smoke rose from downtown. Gunfire echoed across neighborhoods. People ran in every direction. Duke's fuel gauge dipped near empty. He pulled into a gas station on the southern edge of town. As he replaced the pump handle, a woman in a lab coat stepped in front of his van. She was pale, bleeding, bite marks dark against her arm. "My son," she said through trembling breaths. "Jack. 372 Arden Lane. He's alone." Duke's jaw tightened. She pulled a small glass vial from her coat pocket. Blue liquid shimmered inside. "It's the vaccine," she whispered. "You can sell it." He looked at her arm again. "You're infected." "Please." He saw his mother in her eyes. "I'll get him," Duke said. He drove away. He did not look back. Arden Lane, the Mills residence door was open. Upstairs, 3 blood-covered figures hammered against a closed bedroom door. Duke moved fast. First shot, clean headshot. Second, center of the skull. The third lunged too close. The Beretta clicked empty. Duke dropped it and swung the pipe wrench. Bone cracked. He hit again, until it stopped moving. "Jack!" he shouted. A small voice answered from behind the bedroom door. The boy looked 12, too young to understand the sound of skulls breaking downstairs. "Your mom sent me," Duke said. Jack nodded. They barely reached the van before another car slammed into them from the side. Metal shrieked. Glass exploded inward. Duke's head snapped into the steering wheel. Blackness swallowed him. When he woke, smoke filled the cabin. Jack was crying. Duke forced himself upright despite the pounding in his skull. He pulled the boy free from twisted metal. Sirens wailed. Somewhere downtown, something exploded loud enough to shake the air. Duke lifted Jack onto his shoulder. The city burned behind them. He started walking. He had wanted to leave Raccoon City for years. Now the city was dying around him. And it wasn't finished yet. Duke didn't remember crossing the first 2 blocks after the crash. He only remembered weight. Jack wasn't heavy, but with a concussion grinding behind his eyes and blood drying on his face, even a child felt like sandbags strapped to his spine. Smoke drifted low between houses. Somewhere nearby, a car alarm wailed endlessly. Then it cut off mid-blare. The silence that followed was worse. "Put me down," Jack whispered. "You'll fall." "I won't." Duke didn't answer. They reached a 4-way intersection clogged with stalled vehicles. Drivers were gone. Doors hung open. A stroller lay overturned in the middle of the street. Duke stepped around it. He didn't look inside. A sudden crack split the air. Gunfire. Close. He lowered Jack behind the trunk of a sedan and drew the Beretta. 2 figures stumbled between parked cars. One wore hospital scrubs soaked dark with blood. The other wore paramedic blues. The one in scrubs lunged first. Jaw snapping, fingers clawing. The paramedic stepped back, drew a sidearm, and fired. Clean. Headshot. The infected body dropped. The paramedic pivoted instantly, scanning for more. That was when she saw Duke. She didn't flinch at the sight of him covered in blood. She didn't scream. She didn't lower her weapon. She assessed. Duke? He blinked through haze. Barb? Barbara Wells stood in the intersection with her Glock raised, stance squared, eyes alert and controlled. She had filled out since high school, shoulders broader, posture sharper. There was nothing fragile about her. The Marine Corps had carved away whatever softness remained. What happened? She asked. Crash. His mom's infected. Barbara stepped forward without hesitation. Put him down. Duke lowered Jack against a car door. Barbara crouched and examined him quickly. Hands efficient, calm. Name? Jack. Jack, I'm Barbara. Does it hurt to breathe? Jack nodded. Sharp pain? Yeah? She palpated his ribs carefully. Bruised. Maybe hairline fracture. Not life-threatening. Another groan rose from behind a nearby SUV. Barbara stood in one smooth motion and fired twice into the windshield without breaking eye contact with Duke. Two infected slumped against the glass. Duke stared. You alone? She asked. Yeah. Not anymore. She grabbed a trauma kit from the back of the ambulance she had arrived in. The hospital's gone, she said while working antiseptic across Jack's scalp wound. Containment collapsed around noon. Duke felt the word hit. Collapsed. What do you mean? People who were declared dead sat up and started biting staff. Officers fired into crowds. That made it worse. Some of the infected didn't drop. Brad said umbrella. I know what Brad thinks. She wrapped Jack's ribs tightly. City loudspeakers are directing people to the west evacuation site. UBCS deploying. She didn't say it like it was good news. A deep explosion rolled from downtown. Smoke thickened in the western sky. Barbara helped Jack stand. You can walk? Jack nodded. She looked at Duke. You bleeding anywhere important? Shoulder. Head. Can you shoot straight? He chambered the Beretta and fired a test shot into an approaching infected 20 yards away. Headshot. Barbara nodded once. Then we move. They moved west, not through the main road. Barbara avoided it instinctively. She cut through backyards, vaulted fences, checked blind corners before exposing themselves to open ground. Duke followed her lead. At one fence line, an older woman cried out from a porch. Help me! 3 infected neighbors were clawing at her door. Barbara glanced at Duke. He nodded. They moved together. Barbara fired twice from cover. Duke flanked left and fired through the screen door at close range. Bone fragments sprayed across siding. The old woman stumbled outside, shaking. My husband. A shadow moved behind her. Her husband emerged from the doorway, half his face missing. Duke shot him before she could turn around. The woman stared at the body. Barbara grabbed her shoulders. You have family? North side. Go now. The woman ran. They didn't watch her go. They couldn't afford to. The closer they moved toward the western district, the louder it became. Screaming, engines revving, helicopters. The sky vibrated with rotor wash. They reached a rise overlooking the main evacuation route, and stopped. It was a slaughter corridor. Thousands of civilians packed between stalled buses and barricades. UBCS trucks formed a defensive line. Private mercenaries in black tactical gear fired into approaching infected waves. It might have held. For a minute. Then the sky opened. Unmarked helicopters swept low. Dark capsules dropped like bombs. They slammed into asphalt in the middle of the crowd. Duke watched one split open. A hunter crawled out. 8 feet of muscle and claws. It moved faster than any human could track. It ripped a man's head off in one motion. Panic detonated. More capsules fell. 3, 5, 10. The mercenary line broke within seconds. Hunters leapt over vehicles. People were torn apart in front of barricades meant to protect them. Barbara grabbed Duke's arm. That's not evacuation. What is it? Field test. Another capsule crashed less than 50 yards from where they stood. The casing split. Not a hunter this time. Smaller. Lean. A licker uncoiled itself and shrieked. Its exposed brain pulsed under fading daylight. It leapt onto the roof of a bus and dragged a screaming teenager through the broken emergency hatch. Duke forced himself not to look. Side street, Barbara said. They moved fast. A hunter spotted them. It vaulted a sedan and landed between them and the alley entrance. Duke fired the shotgun he'd taken from a fallen UBCS soldier near the edge of the corridor. The blast staggered it. Barbara dropped to one knee and fired 3 controlled bursts into its eye ridge. It lunged anyway. Duke stepped inside its swing and fired point-blank into its jaw hinge. The skull ruptured. The body crashed against a storefront. Jack stared at it. "Keep moving," Barbara ordered. Behind them, the west evacuation site collapsed into complete chaos. Flames spread across fuel lines. Gunfire turned sporadic, then distant, then swallowed by screaming. They turned into a commercial district. Shattered glass littered the sidewalks. An art gallery stood half intact at the end of the block. Through its broken front window, Duke saw movement. A silhouette, holding a blade. Barbara slowed. Careful, they approached. The woman inside didn't flinch. She stepped forward into the dim light, katana in hand, eyes calm. "You infected?" she asked. "No," Barbara replied. The woman nodded once. "Good. Because I'm running out of patience." Outside, another hunter roared. The city had become a testing ground, and the forest road north of here was the only path not yet sealed in blood. The woman in the gallery did not introduce herself immediately. She stood beneath dim track lighting, katana angled downward but ready, posture balanced like someone who understood leverage and distance. Behind her, abstract canvases in violent reds and blacks lined the walls. The city outside roared like something wounded and furious. "You armed?" she asked. Barbara nodded toward the Ruger. "Yes." "Trained?" "Yes." The woman's eyes shifted to Duke. "You? Enough." Her gaze moved to Jack last. The boy didn't lower the Beretta. Interesting. The woman lowered her blade a fraction. "Julia Hawes," she said. "Barbara Wells," Barbara replied. "Duke Mason." Julia's eyes sharpened slightly at Duke's name, but she said nothing. A crash shattered what remained of the gallery's front window. An infected dog burst through in a spray of glass. Julia moved before Duke even raised the shotgun. The katana flashed. The dog's head separated cleanly from its body mid-lunge. The corpse slid across polished wood flooring. A second dog leapt in. Duke fired. The blast tore it apart mid-air. Glass rained down again. A licker crawled through the broken frame, claws digging into brick, long tongue tasting the air. Julia didn't retreat. Barbara fired twice at its skull plate, the rounds deflected. The licker launched forward. Julia sidestepped with controlled precision and drove the katana upward through its soft lower jaw. The blade punched into its brain. The creature convulsed violently, knocking over 2 framed paintings before collapsing. Silence returned. Julia wiped blood from her face with the back of her sleeve. "Well," she said calmly, "that solves my insurance dilemma." Duke glanced at her. "Burning the place down?" She smirked faint like that. Barbara moved to the rear exit. "We don't stay." Julia followed without argument. The alley behind the gallery was darker than it should have been for late afternoon. Smoke filtered between buildings, muting the sun. Something shifted along the brick wall above them. Barbara raised her carbine. Too late. A licker dropped from a fire escape directly onto the pavement behind Jack. Duke shoved the boy forward and fired point blank. The blast shredded one of the creature's forelimbs. It shrieked and slashed wildly. Claws tore across Duke's shoulder, ripping fabric and drawing blood. Julia stepped in with frightening precision and severed the licker's head in a clean arc. It fell twitching at her feet. 2 more infected dogs rounded the alley corner. Barbara fired 1 shot per dog. Both dropped. Then came something worse. Movement above. 3 lickers clung to the vertical walls like grotesque spiders. They leapt in coordinated motion. Julia rolled left, blade flashing. Barbara fired upward. Duke grabbed Jack and shoved him behind a dumpster. 1 licker landed on a stack of crates and sprang again. Julia intercepted midair, slicing through exposed brain tissue in a violent downward strike. The creature split open and collapsed. The final licker reached Barbara. She didn't backpedal. She stepped forward and drove her combat knife upward beneath its skull ridge as Duke fired into its torso. It spasmed and fell. The alley fell silent except for their breathing. Jack stared at the bodies. "Why are they like that?" he whispered. No one answered. They emerged onto a wider commercial avenue. Panic still churned here. Civilians pushed past each other toward the Western District. A man tripped near a toppled mailbox. The crowd surged over him without slowing. His scream was brief. Duke started forward instinctively. Barbara grabbed his arm. "You'll die." He looked down at the crushed body. He didn't argue. Above them, a lone UBCS sniper repositioned on a rooftop, firing into the street below. 1 precise shot after another. Effective. Until something rose behind him. A hunter. It stepped from a stairwell access hatch like a nightmare walking upright. It grabbed the sniper by the throat, threw him off the roof. The body struck pavement 10 yards from the group. The hunter leapt down after it. Barbara fired immediately. Duke flanked. Julia circled wide. The hunter absorbed 2 shots before closing distance. Duke fired the shotgun into its knee joint. It stumbled. Julia severed its forearm. Barbara finished it with 3 rounds into the eye. They didn't celebrate. They ran. The zoo gate stood twisted open. Animal screams echoed from within. Deep. Wrong. They entered cautiously. Cages stood shattered. Blood-streaked concrete walkways. A zoo intern lay near the reptile house, abdomen torn open. Something moved inside the primate enclosure. A chimpanzee slammed itself against chain-link fencing with unnatural strength. Its teeth were black with blood. It tore through weakened mesh and launched itself toward them. Julia tried to intercept, but the chimp changed direction midair. It landed on Jack. Duke tackled it off him and smashed its head into the pavement again and again until skull gave way. Jack rolled onto his side, shaking but conscious. "You bit?" Barbara demanded. "No," she checked quickly. "No punctures." From deeper in the zoo, a roar rolled outward. Heavy. Predatory. Julia exhaled slowly. "That's not a chimp." They moved toward the safari enclosure. Bodies lay scattered, visitors and staff alike. A man in a zoo uniform stood near the elephant pen, gray hair, calm expression, watching them. "You're loud," he said mildly. Barbara kept her weapon ready. "You staying?" The man nodded. "Donald Barnaby." "Everyone's evacuating," Duke said. Donald gave a faint smile. "I was considering ending things anyway." Julia tilted her head. "Cancer?" He nodded. "Liver." Another roar shook the air. Donald glanced toward tall grass near the lion habitat. "They're out." Movement rippled through the grass. First 1, then 3, then 6 infected lions emerged. Their manes were patchy, skin torn, eyes clouded but focused. Predators made worse. The largest stepped forward and growled low. Barbara raised her carbine. Duke chambered another shell. Julia adjusted her stance. Jack raised the Beretta. Donald sighed quietly. "Well," he murmured, "let's see who still wants to live." The lions charged, and the zoo became a killing ground. The first lion didn't roar. It exhaled, a deep, rumbling breath that vibrated through broken concrete and bone alike. Then it moved, faster than instinct, faster than fear. It cleared 20 feet in a single bound, claws extended, jaws wide. Barbara fired first. 3 rapid shots from the Ruger. 1 struck shoulder, 1 grazed rib, 1 cracked along the skull ridge. The lion didn't slow. Duke stepped forward and fired the shotgun mid-leap. The blast hit center mass. The animal twisted in air, blood spraying in a violent arc, but still crashed into him with crushing weight. He hit the pavement hard. The lion's jaws snapped inches from his face. Its breath was hot and rancid, rot and blood and something chemical beneath it. Duke jammed the shotgun sideways to keep the jaws from closing. The beast's claws tore into his chest, shredding fabric and skin. Barbara moved without hesitation. She circled wide and fired point blank into its eye. The skull ruptured. The lion went limp on top of Duke. He shoved the corpse aside, gasping. 5 remained. 2 flanked wide. 1 went straight for Jack. Jack froze for half a second. Then he remembered. Breathe. Aim. He fired. The first shot shattered teeth. The second tore through cheekbone. The third entered the eye. The lion stumbled, but didn't fall. It lunged again. Julia intercepted. Her katana flashed in a tight horizontal cut. The blade sliced across the lion's forelimb, severing tendons. The animal crashed awkwardly to the ground. She pivoted and drove the blade down through the base of its skull. It convulsed violently before going still. Another lion struck from Barbara's blind side. Donald moved first. He grabbed a steel feeding hook, leaning against a post, and thrust it into the lion's mouth as it lunged. The animal clamped down instinctively, jaws locking on metal instead of flesh. Barbara stepped inside its reach and fired twice into its eye socket. Brain matter sprayed across her sleeve. The lion collapsed. 2 left. They circled. Smart. Working angles. Duke reloaded with shaking hands. Blood ran down his ribs from claw marks. The concussion hummed behind his eyes. 1 lion lunged toward Julia. The other feinted left and went for Donald. Donald didn't move fast enough this time. The lion hit him full force. They rolled across gravel. Claws tore through his uniform shirt. Duke roared and charged, firing into the animal's spine. The blast staggered it. Barbara closed distance and put a round directly through its ear canal. It dropped. Donald lay bleeding heavily from his side. The final lion turned toward Jack again. It had learned. Weakest target. Julia stepped between them. The lion lunged. She didn't retreat. She stepped forward into the attack. The katana rose in a full two-handed arc and came down with every ounce of controlled fury she possessed. The blade split the lion's skull clean from crown to jaw. The animal collapsed in two wet halves at her feet. Silence fell over the zoo. 6 lions dead. Concrete soaked in blood. Donald groaned. Barbara dropped beside him immediately. Deep lacerations across abdomen. Muscle visible. "Hold pressure," she ordered Duke. Duke pressed both hands into Donald's wound. Donald winced, but didn't cry out. "Told you," he murmured weakly. "I don't run." "You're not dying here," Barbara said. She worked fast. Gauze, compression, bandage wrap pulled tight. "Not fatal," she concluded. "Painful as hell." Donald gave a small smile. "I've had worse." They moved into the staff maintenance building to regroup. Night was coming. Fast. The truth about the road inside the dim maintenance office. Duke leaned against a wall, catching breath. Jack sat silently on an overturned crate, staring at his blood-streaked hands. Julia cleaned her blade carefully. Barbara finished securing Donald's bandage. "You mentioned a forest road," Duke said. Donald nodded. "North exit, service access that curves past the Spencer estate." "Spencer?" Barbara asked. "Old money. Private mansion in the Arklay foothills." Julia's eyes flicked toward him. "Umbrella ties?" Donald didn't answer directly. "The forest road doesn't get traffic?" "Not civilian traffic." Duke understood, which meant it wasn't blocked. "Vehicles?" Barbara asked. Donald thought. "There's an ATV and dirt bike shop on Brennan Road." Duke nodded. "I've done plumbing there." "Single seat and double seat?" Julia asked. "Yes." Barbara looked around the room. "Then we move now, before full dark." They exited the zoo through the rear service gate. Behind them, scavenger birds had already begun circling the lion carcasses. Brennan Road. The streets were emptier now. Not safer. Just emptier. Bodies lay where they had fallen. Smoke drifted low and heavy. Somewhere behind them a distant explosion rolled through the air like thunder. The ATV shop stood ahead, glass shattered, but structure intact. Duke approached cautiously. He heard it before he saw it, a wet clicking growl from the service bay. 3 hunters stepped into view, their claws scraped tile, their eyes locked on movement. The first leapt. Duke dove sideways, firing mid-roll. The blast tore through its thigh, spinning it off balance. Barbara entered behind him and fired 3 controlled bursts into its eye ridge. The creature shrieked, but kept moving. The second hunter vaulted a counter and slashed at Julia. She pivoted away, blade flashing. She severed 2 of its fingers mid-swing. It roared. Donald grabbed a heavy impact wrench and slammed it into the creature's knee from behind. Barbara finished it with a shot through the skull. The third hunter moved toward Jack. Jack didn't hesitate this time. He fired twice, missed once, hit the second in the throat. The creature closed distance anyway. Duke intercepted, ramming the shotgun muzzle under its jaw and firing. The skull detonated. Brain matter splattered across a display rack. Silence. Duke exhaled slowly. "Keys," he muttered. They found them behind the counter. 3 ATVs, 1 double seat, 2 single. Julia took the double with Jack behind her. Barbara mounted 1 single. Duke mounted the last. Donald climbed onto Duke's rear rack despite his injuries. As they rolled out onto Brennan Road, the sky to the south glowed faintly. White. Not orange. White. Barbara saw it too. "They're escalating," she said. The ATVs roared north into the forest. Behind them, Raccoon City was beginning to die for good. The pavement ended gradually. Asphalt became gravel. Gravel became packed dirt. Dirt became a narrow scar carved through ancient forest. The ATVs roared into the tree line. The sound of the city faded behind them. No more sirens, no more screaming crowds, only engine vibration and the restless whisper of wind through pine. Duke kept his throttle steady. Donald's grip on the rear rack was firm despite the blood seeping through his bandage. "You still with me?" Duke shouted over the engine. Donald coughed once. "For now." Barbara rode slightly behind and left, scanning constantly. Julia maintained balance smoothly, Jack gripping her waist tightly. The deeper they moved into the Arklay foothills, the darker it became. Not from sunset. From canopy density, branches interlocked overhead, choking out the sky. The forest felt older than the city, older than Umbrella. Then the first shape moved between trees. Lean. Fast. Infected wolves. Donald yelled. A gray blur launched from the brush toward Duke's front wheel. Duke swerved hard, barely missing teeth, snapping inches from rubber. Barbara fired one-handed while steering with the other. The wolf's skull burst mid-stride. But more followed. 6, 8, a coordinated pack. They didn't lunge wildly like the infected in the city. They hunted. 2 flanked Julia's ATV. 1 leapt onto the rear rack. Jack screamed as claws scraped near his back. Julia released one hand and slashed backward without looking. The blade sliced across the wolf's muzzle. It tumbled off into the underbrush. Another wolf snapped at Barbara's leg. She accelerated straight into it. The ATV's front tires crushed its ribcage with a sickening crunch. Duke fired backward over his shoulder. The shotgun blast shredded a wolf's hindquarters. It spun violently before going still. The remaining wolves hesitated, then melted back into the trees. Predators regrouping. The road climbed steeply. Rocky now. Roots twisted across the path. Ahead, through thinning branches, something emerged. Stone, Gothic, massive. Spencer Mansion. Even at a distance, it radiated wrongness. Windows dark. Architecture too grand for the isolation. Barbara slowed slightly. "That's not just a house." Donald's voice came strained but steady. "No, what is it?" Jack asked quietly. "A place where bad ideas grew teeth," Donald answered. The road curved around the estate perimeter. They didn't approach it. No one wanted to. The engine sputtered. All 3 ATVs died at once. Duke tried the ignition again. Nothing. The forest went silent. Not natural silence. Watching silence. A branch snapped. Then another. 6 hunters stepped onto the road from both sides. Formation. Not random. Behind them, a heavier footstep cracked through fallen timber. Slow. Certain. The tyrant emerged from the tree line. 8 feet tall. Skin gray and stretched tight over unnatural muscle. Its heart pulsed visibly through exposed rib restraints. Its single eye scanned the group. Jack whispered, "Oh my God." Barbara's voice was calm. "Into the trees. Now." They abandoned the ATVs. The hunters charged immediately. The tyrant walked. It didn't need speed. It knew. The hunters split formation. 2 flanked left, 2 right, 2 directly forward. Duke fired first. A blast tore through one hunter's knee. It collapsed, shrieking. Barbara fired controlled bursts into another's skull. Julia moved like liquid steel, blade flashing as she severed a forearm mid-swing. Claws raked Duke's back. He turned and drove his combat knife upward into a hunter's throat while firing point-blank into its chest. It collapsed against him. Donald tried to move, but his wound slowed him. A hunter struck him hard, claws tearing deeper into his abdomen. He fell. Barbara shot the creature through the eye. It dropped. Duke dragged Donald behind a fallen log. Blood pooled fast. Donald gripped Duke's arm. "Listen, no, listen." The tyrant stepped fully onto the road. Hunters repositioned around it. Like guards, like escorts. This wasn't coincidence. It was pursuit. "You get them over the ridge," Donald said. "We all go," Duke replied. Donald shook his head slowly. "I choose this." Before Duke understood his intent, Donald rolled toward a dead UBCS operative half hidden in brush. He pulled a fragmentation grenade from the corpse's vest. He locked eyes with Duke. "Cancer was slow," he whispered. "This isn't." He pulled the pin and charged. The hunters reacted too late. The tyrant swung one massive arm. Donald tackled it at the waist. The explosion tore through the forest. Heat and debris blasted outward. Duke shielded Jack instinctively. Bark, metal, bone fragments rained down. When smoke cleared, the tyrant was still standing. Half its chest cavity blown open. Heart exposed and pulsing erratically. Donald's body lay in pieces. The hunters hesitated, damaged, confused. Barbara didn't hesitate. She unloaded into the exposed heart. Rounds tore into muscle. The tyrant staggered. Duke fired his last shotgun shell directly into the wound cavity. The creature roared. Julia sprinted forward. She leapt onto a fallen trunk, gained height, and drove the katana downward with full force. The blade split the tyrant's skull from crown to jaw. It froze, shuddered, collapsed backward with earth-shaking weight. Silence. 6 hunters lay dead. The tyrant lay split open. Donald was gone. Jack stared at the carnage. "Is it dead?" he whispered. Barbara stepped forward carefully. One final shot into the exposed brainstem. The forest returned to stillness. Duke looked south through the trees. A distant white glow rose into the night sky. Not fire. Too bright. Barbara saw it too. "They're sterilizing it," she said quietly. Raccoon City had reached its final hour. Duke helped Jack over the ridge. They descended the opposite slope on foot. Behind them, the Spencer estate loomed in darkness. Ahead, Dunham County. Freedom. Or something like it. Hours later, they found an abandoned Forest Service truck near the county boundary. Keys in ignition. They drove north. Far from the white glow. Far from the ash. They drove in silence. The Forest Service truck rattled over uneven gravel as Duke kept both hands locked around the steering wheel. His knuckles were pale. Blood had dried stiff across his shirt and sleeves. He hadn't noticed when it stopped hurting. Behind them, the sky pulsed white. Not orange flame, not the flicker of structural fires. White. Artificial. Distant. A bloom that swallowed stars. Jack turned in his seat and watched it through the rear window. "That's the city," he said quietly. No one corrected him. The light grew brighter for a long, suspended moment. Then, it became a second sunrise. Even miles away, the flash rolled over the mountains in a blinding wave. Duke instinctively hit the brakes and shielded his eyes. Barbara pulled Jack down between the seats. A heartbeat later, the shockwave followed. The sound did not resemble an explosion. It was deeper. Heavier. Like the sky itself being torn open. The blast wave struck the truck, rocking it violently on its suspension. Pine trees along the ridgeline bent and snapped. Then came the silence. Not the earlier watching silence. Not predator silence, but absence. The white glow began to fade into a mushroom-shaped pillar rising above where Raccoon City had stood. Julia spoke first. They didn't contain it. Barbara's voice was flat. They erased it. Duke stared at the horizon. His mother, the house, the bar, the streets. All of it vaporized. Raccoon City no longer existed. He did not cry. He did not rage. He felt something quieter. Final. Dunham County. The truck crossed the county line before dawn. No barricades. No military presence. The world outside the blast radius still slept. Duke pulled into an abandoned rest stop and killed the engine. For the first time in hours, there was no urgency. Only exhaustion. Jack fell asleep almost immediately, head against the window. Julia leaned back in silence, blade across her lap. Barbara stepped out of the truck and looked south. Duke joined her. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded once. "You?" "I've seen cities burn," she said, "just not from that far away." They stood there until the first light of morning replaced the fading nuclear haze. "Donald chose it," Duke said quietly. "Yes." "Does that make it better?" Barbara looked at him. "No. Portland." 2 days later, they reached Portland. News coverage was confused. Chemical plant explosion. Possible reactor failure. Federal investigation. No mention of bioweapons. No mention of hunters. No mention of tyrants. The world would not be told the truth. Not yet. Jack's grandparents lived in a modest suburban neighborhood untouched by panic. When the truck pulled into their driveway, Duke felt something tighten in his chest. Jack hesitated before stepping out. "You promised," he said. "I did." Jack knocked on the door. An older woman answered. She froze, then pulled him into her arms. His grandfather stepped forward slowly, eyes scanning Duke and Barbara. "What happened?" the old man asked. Duke didn't lie. "The city's gone." That was enough. They didn't ask for details. Some truths were too large to process in one afternoon. Jack turned before going inside. "Are you staying?" Duke shook his head. "No." Jack nodded. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. He understood something older than gratitude. Debt. The vial. The blue liquid sat inside a locked case in the truck's back compartment. Barbara opened it carefully. The vial remained intact, cold, untouched. Julia leaned against the truck. "That little bottle could change everything," she said. "Or disappear," Barbara replied. Duke closed the case. "We don't hand it to anyone official," Barbara nodded. "I know someone." A former Marine, now working security for a biotech research firm in Seattle. Not government. Not Umbrella. A competitor. One that had been quietly investigating Umbrella's monopolies for years. Leverage, that was what the vial represented. Leverage. Julia's departure. Julia did not stay long. She met them at a small airport 3 days later. "I was going to burn my gallery," she said. "Collect insurance. Start over." She adjusted the strap on her carry-on. "Instead, I survived a city's execution." She looked at Duke. "You don't look as angry." He didn't answer. She smiled faintly. "I think you needed something bigger than your stepfather." She boarded without ceremony. Cambodia awaited her. Temples older than corporations. Canvas without smoke. The sale Duke never met the buyers. Barbara handled the contact through her Marine connection. The vial changed hands under sterile lighting in a secure lab in Seattle. No umbrella insignias, no government seals, just private ambition. The money moved through layered accounts. Duke didn't ask how much. He didn't want a number attached to what it cost. What mattered was this: the formula would not vanish. It would not be buried. It would not die with the city. The ocean 6 months later, Duke stood on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. The air smelled of salt instead of rot. Barbara stood beside him. "You still feel anchored?" she asked. He thought about his mother, about the house, about the prison, about Donald charging a tyrant with a grenade in his hand, about Jack knocking on his grandparents' door. "No," he said. Barbara slipped her hand into his. "Good." Behind them, a small house near the coast waited. Work waited. A life that wasn't built on reaction. Somewhere far inland, hearings began. Umbrella stock shifted quietly, executives disappeared, investigations surfaced, but Duke no longer felt trapped inside those currents. He had chosen. The ocean stretched endless before him. Behind him, a city had turned to ash. And for the first time in his life, Duke Mason was not staying out of obligation. He was staying because he wanted to.